I identify as an entrepreneur. I grew up as an entrepreneur. I'm a negotiation coach with the Swan group. I've worked with like 150 entrepreneurial businesses to help them grow their business. You're going to be like, well, but so-and-so's been with me for 5 years, so we have to find a seat for them. I'm like, no. Structure first, people second. What got you to where you are, those folks are not going to get you where you want to go. When you're explaining too early, you're losing.
What makes us a good listener? How do we listen better?
I think good listening starts with staying curious. If your intuition is saying that something doesn't make sense, trust your intuition.
Welcome to the Money Signal podcast from Main Street to Wall Street. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Jonathan Smith. Thank you so much for coming. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me on this beautiful day.
Yeah, I'm so honored that you're back on the podcast and now you're actually in front of the camera with us. I have so many questions for you and I don't even know where to start from and where to dive in from. But how about we focus maybe on several kind of like key points and key areas for our interview today. Sure. I'd love to hear more about basically the psychology aspect. So again, of negotiation and how you can help us understand fighting less and winning more from a psychological standpoint. I'd love to learn more about if we put that in the perspective of markets and trading from the financial angle, what that looks like. And then thirdly, I'd love to learn more about your book, Fight Less, Win More, which you co-wrote with Chris Voss, who was also in our podcast recently. So those are kind of like the key areas for our interview today. So why don't we start off with, firstly, more about you. Who is Jonathan Smith and how did you even get to do what you do today?
Well, I identify as an entrepreneur. I grew up as an entrepreneur and I'm always open to new opportunities. So one of the conversations I was having today was about the Middle East. I had spent a bunch of time in the Middle East. My dad invented a product, a floating security barrier called Whisperwave. And I use search engine optimization to actually sell that product in the Middle East.
Oh, wow. What countries did you live there?
I lived here and he lived there, but I went back and forth a ton. So it was UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
That's awesome.
But given what's going on in the Gulf at this point, understanding their perspective in the business environment there's a lot of interest around that conversation. And
you realized working on the product, basically how to mostly optimize and sell it, basically commercialize that same product and make it a market success. Is that were you instrumental in the product?
The issue is we couldn't find the end users for the product. He invented a product, but then we had to figure out product market fit. And so in 1999, I taught myself search engine optimization.
Wow. This is even before it was called search engine optimization, I think. And the internet was still...
It might have been called that, but like it was a lot easier. You could do keyword stuffing and things like that at the time.
Yeah.
But I taught myself that. And then what I ended up doing was build a long tail search engine strategy that in fact brought people from all over the world. And then the truth was the best markets for us were actually in the Middle East because there was high value critical infrastructure, the money to pay for protecting that infrastructure, and then potential for terrorism. So this was all post 9/11. And we thought we were going to do a lot of work in the States and we did a lot more work in the Middle East.
That was the first time you actually realized that you have the entrepreneurial spirit in you?
I grew up like at the board table at 4 years old with my grandfather. So I didn't think there was any choice but to be an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. And what do you do now?
Today, I'm actually, we wrote this book, Fight Less, Win More. I'm a negotiation coach with the Swan group, as well as an expert EOS implementer. So I've worked with like 150 entrepreneurial businesses to help them grow their business. It's like, for example, last night we had a deal dinner for a client who had just sold the private equity at the New York Athletic Club. So pretty awesome to have that successful dinner.
Not bad perks when you work with when you work as an entrepreneur and you get to meet cool people. Yeah, some of the perks are you get to meet you get to sit down with cool people and make great deals, right? So
great deals and then do really interesting things.
Yeah, and not and work on your own time and just enjoy life more. I always say like working for someone is harder because you have to make them happy and reach their objectives, and working for yourself is an instant path to higher chances of happiness and obviously like more flexibility in the day to day, which I know is quite important for at least, in this time of life, meaning how fast paced life is.
It was interesting because I did work on Wall Street for a while. So I worked on 60 Wall Street.
Tell me more. Hold on. I didn't see that in your bio.
No,
where was that?
it's like buried somewhere. So I work at JP Morgan before they merged with Chase. So they were at 60 Wall Street.
What did you do there?
I was in Treasury when I was there.
Okay.
And I worked there, and one day I was sitting downstairs watching people walk out at 5 o'clock, and I'm like, there's no one over 40 who's walking out of here at 5 o'clock. Everyone who's over 40 that's coming out of here at 5 o'clock is going to the basement to their limousine. So I think there's a lot more risk staying here as an employee than there was to go figure out my own thing.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have so much experience, like various experience across industries. So it seems like if the product that you started in the Middle East with your dad, you must have been very young while managing that same product. And then did your dad ever exit? Did he sell the company?
I left because it was too hard to work with my dad at some point. And it was very challenging to go back and forth long haul to the Middle East.
Yeah. And is that when you decided to go into banking, into GP?
No. I was in 2011, I left the business with my dad, and then I became an EOS implementer at that point.
What does that mean, a U.S. implementer?
So I'm the guy who can talk to the CEO and actually call them out on their stuff.
So you're the CEO whisperer or the CEO boss?
I'm not the boss. I'm not the boss. I'm the person they call me. I'm actually Chris Voss's CEO whisperer also. That's actually how I got to know him.
Okay, so you're able to basically take feedback from employees and hear the signals, read the room, understand the situation, come back to the CEO and help them with direction and help them understand better the situation.
I actually help them run their leadership team meetings quarterly and basically negotiate those conversations.
Wow, that's very interesting. I mean, just thinking about working with CEOs and how difficult it must be to understand how they think. And again, like CEOs who are under tremendous pressure, reaching specific company objectives, there's always stress. So you must be a very good CEO whisperer.
And negotiator. I get to practice. I'm actually probably get to practice more active negotiation than anyone else on the team because I do that a couple of days a week with clients.
And I'm sure it's very hard to negotiate with CEOs at all times, especially if they're the CEOs of their own company. I know I speak from personal experience. I always appreciate actually when my team comes and bosses me around. I always say that I don't know everything and I need help in trying to understand and piece the puzzles together. But I'm sure that the CEOs who you work with probably appreciate a lot of the feedback and ideas that you bring to the table. Now, why don't we talk about psychology? Because it sounds like you work. It's this intersection of negotiation and communication, right? It's all very closely tied to outcomes and the psychology of how do you have the person against you or the person who are you sitting with, reach the outcome that you like them to get to. So with CEOs, not only do you help them function better as a CEO and also portray the company values better to the company, but how did you get into basically the negotiation and the psychological part of the business?
Well, when I became this EOS implementer, so I'm a teacher. I teach specific content. I coach the team through the content, and then I facilitate that content. So that's what I'm supposed to be. And then I also say I'm an entrepreneur. So I'm an entrepreneur on the team. And what was happening was it wasn't that hard to understand the technicalities of how to run the business. What the hardest part was to get the team to work together. and build a high performance team. And to communicate that, where I wasn't telling them what to do. As a facilitator, I'm an observer and an intervention. I'm not like, CEO, you should do this, because no one wants to listen to that. Like, then I become a threat. But I can actually get them to do things. Or one of my friends says, I'm the person who gets to show you the possibilities of things that you can do beyond what you thought was possible.
So you sell them the vision, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I can see the vision that they can't see for themselves a lot of times.
That's a great skill, by the way. Not many people have that. So if you're able to, through negotiation and again, psychology, show them the vision and they see it, I'm sure that leads to great successes.
Yeah, and then sometimes it leads to, I usually start, we were joking last night at New York Athletic Club that when I start with them, I'm like, not all of you are going to make it through this process. And I can't tell you who's not going to make it through the process. But there's always collateral damage. And that collateral damage is just because that person didn't belong there in the first place. Maybe what got you to where you are, those folks are not going to get you where you want to go.
And what are those traits? How do you know, like when you see the people, like who are the ones who are not going to make it? Are there any specific qualities or traits that you see in them right away?
Well, first and foremost, like we say you have to have right people, right seats. So right people is defined as core values fit. Mm-hmm. Do you have the same core values of the people you're working with? So
okay.
There's you could run a business on the good business model or the evil business model. Both work. But if your team runs on the good business model and one person wants to run on the evil business model, that won't work. So that's wrong person. Those behaviors are wrong. And the other thing is they have to be in the right seat. So we have to say you have to get it, want it, and have the capacity to do the job that you've been defined to do. So we have to have right people, right seats. And I could just feel it. I'm in the room. I'm like, this person just said they don't believe in the chain of command. And directly to the CEO, I don't think this is going to work in the long run.
So how do they get to the right seat is the question. Does it have to do with luck? Or does it have to do with network? Or does it have to do with timing? One of the things I love exploring, and that question is rooted in that, is how do we identify the signals? So how do you get to the right seats? How do I identify as someone who would like to be in the right seat that this is the right seat and the best seat? Does it really have to do with luck or introductions, or does it have to do with something else?
So we say, let's say I'm working on your business with you, I would say, okay, we're going to build an accountability chart. So think of it as an org chart with a series of roles and responsibilities under each function. And I'm going to say we go structure first, people second. Mm-hmm. You're going to be like, well, but so-and-so's been with me for 5 years, so we have to find a seat for them. I'm like, no. Structure first, people second. So we decide the structure, and then we decide where the people fit. And so sometimes there's not a seat, especially in a small business. If there's not a seat for them, they have to go find a seat that'll work for them somewhere else.
And when you think of investors, so again, you work with a variety of clients and variety of industries through your work with the Black Swan Group. I know you guys meet with all kinds of industries really. I'd love to understand from your perspective, where does basically, what parallels do you see when it comes to negotiation psychology and high pressure, think of investor psychology? So you're basically thinking of your CEOs that you operate with and that you're whispering to, let's call it that. And then you have a variety of other audiences. What is that kind of parallel intersection between those two? If there is one, there one?
Well, I think one of our laws of negotiation gravity says that fear is the biggest driver of human decision-making and behavior. So it goes back to fear in any case, like in a business, and then the behavioral economics that drive Wall Street. So what's driving Wall Street? Why is oil all over the place? In terms of the volatility right now, because they don't know what's going to happen with the Straits of Hormuz. And, it's just not clear what's going to happen. So that's driving a lot of the volatility that's happening right now. Same thing that happens in a business. A business that has clarity about where they're going is a lot less volatile than one who's worried about, like we say, keeping the heart beating. Like, are we going to be able to make payroll next week?
And I know that a lot of these, I mean, again, parallels that I'm thinking as you're talking is in finance. Finance is data based, yes, fear based as well. Obviously, when it comes to stock movement, but a lot of it is data based. So, how do CEOs, for example, when it comes to understanding decisions and whether they have to negotiate, fight less, or win more, do they base decisions also on data? And if so, what are those data sets that they look at?
Yeah, so it's really interesting when I do negotiations training, like let's say with a private equity firm or an investment management firm, or I haven't worked with people like Peter at this point, but if I were to work with those folks, a lot of times, like the Harvard Business School, Wharton Business School folks start with data. So they're like, we're going to go into a negotiation, we're going to tell them how it is, and this is how it works. And I'm like, well, first of all, they have to feel heard. And if they don't feel heard and they don't feel an emotional connection to what's going on, you will not have trust-based vulnerability, and you will not be able to get to the deal and explain to your counterpart your position. So we say when you're explaining too early, you're losing. And a lot of folks who have learned to just talk with data and not deal with the emotional aspects of the negotiation fail for
And
that reason.
are those lessons that you learned that you wanted to implement in Fight Less, Win More? Is that how the book was born?
Okay, so from a data perspective, because you like data, the book was born from the fact that there's a book called Traction, and Traction is the book that EOS is based on, that my friend Gino Wickman wrote. There's another book called What the Heck is EOS? So Traction is the equivalent of like Never Split the Difference.
Mm-hmm.
And What the Heck is EOS is like the book for the line people in your business. So like just your average employee who don't want to know exactly how everything works. So my business partner and very good friend, Mark O'Donnell, is the CEO of EOS today. And he said, these two books sell one for one on a go forward basis. And I said, well, Chris has got Never Split the Difference. It sold 5 million copies. Let's go build something that's adjacent to Never Split the Difference, that once people realize that the two books belong together, hopefully we'll sell on a one for one basis, on a go forward basis. So that was data driven.
I love that you based it off of data. Again, one of the key predictors, in my opinion, for success is the past. And again, basing on data from the past. So if you guys built upon the data set that you had at the time. In the book itself, can you talk to us a bit more about specific skill sets that, you or any of our listeners should have acquire? Or what are those skill sets specifically that help us fight less and win more? If you had to name a few.
Well, so the first skill, and this sounds really simple, like we should have learned this as a child, listening. Like,
I will tell my children that. Listening, kids, yes.
So, and ideally, we say there's 5 levels of listening. And the idea is listening for the gist is like, you're talking to me and I'm on my phone, and then you don't think there's any way I'm listening to you, and I'm shaking my head. You're like, no way. Listening to hijack is like, you're talking, as soon as you take a breath, I jump in and hijack the conversation. Don't actually talk about what you're talking about, but in fact, take it in my direction. That doesn't feel good either. Listening for logic, like everyone has a reason for saying what they're saying. So we need to start at level 3, which is listening for logic.
Mm-hmm. As adults, that's where we start off.
Children, we should ideally do that too, because when anyone listens to hijack, it doesn't feel good. So the bottom line is there's a reason. Our label we would use is, it seems like there's a reason you're asking, or it seems like there's a reason you're saying that. There is a reason. We say, stay curious. Why is the person saying what they're saying? Mm-hmm. And then the fourth level is listening for logic and emotion. So there's an emotion behind the logic. And then the 5th one is listening for their point of view. What's their worldview? Where did they come from? Why do they think the way they do? They may think differently than you, but if you can acknowledge the way they think, they'll be much more likely to do a deal with you. So it starts there.
And how do we become better listeners?
Lots of practice and awareness. we need to be aware of the fact that we need to listen better. I oftentimes will write it on the board.
So in a world of analytics and data, what makes us a good listener? How do we listen better?
I think good listening starts with staying curious, literally being open to possibilities. We like to say, don't be so sure about what deal you take that you wouldn't take something better.
That's great. It kind of got me thinking actually about something that Peter says very often. So I'm sure if he were here, he would have asked more about listening in terms of buy the rumor, sell the news is something he always says, right? This is, I think, a pretty famous investor quote. Mm-hmm. So how do you listen through rumors better? So if you're a trader, I know a lot of our audience is finance focused, retail investors and everyday people who invest. How do you listen through rumors better? Is there such a way to do it? How do you listen?
Well, we like to say that your conscious processes 40 bits of information per second. Your subconscious processes 20 million bits per second. So part of our negotiation is to trust our intuition. If your intuition is saying that something doesn't make sense, trust your intuition. And then we go test it against the person we're talking to.
And in today's world, which is very driven by AI, what is the human skill that you think we must do our best to preserve?
Okay, so I've done 400 negotiations using AI for preparation with extraordinarily amount of success. So I just started using it a couple of years ago. And you asked me, how do we do this? One of the things I've done is built a series of GPTs. One of the GPTs will give me the point of view of the person who we're talking to. So I literally can feed in their LinkedIn profile, their bio, interviews they've had in the newspaper, the transcripts they might have from either investor calls or from podcasts. And it'll give me a sense, like literally in like every single meeting I go into, I have a target brief that says, this is this person's point of view if I don't know them, if I haven't met them. I have a negotiation one sheet, and that negotiation one sheet literally says, here's a summary of the negotiation because I prompted it. Here's some accusations audits you might consider. And an accusation audit is a way of neutralizing the negative emotion that someone has in their head when you start the conversation. So think of it as like negative emotion canceling. So like noise canceling cancels out the noise. This cancels out the negative emotion. It takes the negative emotion off the table, and it'll tell you things that you like, I don't want to say that. I don't want to put that in their head. You can't put it in their head. They'll correct you if you're wrong, unless you're trying to manipulate them. It'll give you some labels that you should use to label the scenario. It'll give you some calibrated questions that actually say, here's some questions you might want to ask. And I'll just give you, like, a lot of times I have it so it'll give you like 10 of each example, and 2 of them are really great. And it's like, go use those 2. And the other thing, which is a little scary, is there's a book called Spy the Lie, and it's the techniques that the CIA polygraph examiners use to try to uncover deception and lying. So I built a GPT using those techniques, and I've actually used it with public companies and hedge funds to actually try and determine where there's actually deception. So if it's a scripted conversation, it's a lot harder than if it's a non-scripted conversation. Really, we want someone on the record, but like unscripted in terms of their conversation, and it will demonstrate the intents to deceive.
And how do you spy the lie? If you're speaking with a person and you don't know who they are, because again, like in your negotiations, you prepare heavily, obviously, who you're sitting down with, but how can you actually spot the lie at the time of the other person saying it?
So like, it's really interesting. So these large language models, like as long as I give it a framework to look against the transcript, there's a framework of 18 different things that someone could say to spy the lie. One of them is when someone gives you an overly specific answer. So, for example, I was working in a construction firm in my EOS practice, and someone on the team said, well, if someone were to steal, here's what they would do. No, I did not ask that question. So that's called like a spontaneous utterance. Like, why did he just say that? And then he explained to me how you would actually steal. So I said, when I got out of the meeting, I went to the CEO. I said, look, we need the auditors to go look into what's going on with him because I think he's stealing. It's $1 million embezzlement there.
Wow.
That's one example.
Wow. That's fascinating.
So
pay attention to the details and yeah, the patterns and signals that people give you.
And you just break it down into data. It is actually data at that point.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This is so interesting. Now, you mentioned actually another word that caught my attention, which was manipulation as part of the negotiation. Is there truly a manipulation aspect when it comes to being able to manipulate the person opposite of you? And if so, what do you go for? Is it the emotional aspect, like who they are as a human? Is it something else?
So our version of negotiation is, first of all, we don't lie. Second of all, we use the skills for good and not for evil. So we don't use it for manipulation. So, and because people can smell intent, if they feel like they're getting manipulated, they can smell it. Like over centuries, we've learned how to deal with that.
And in the context of AI, what you mentioned to me was also very interesting. What do you think is going to be the future when it comes to AI implementation in our daily lives? I mean, do you think that AI can take over negotiation for us?
So we're working with a group that is dealing with purchasing. And one of the issues is AI can do bargaining. So our version of bargaining is being at like the market and going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over a commodity. Mm-hmm. So it may be able to do some of that for sure, but it's not going to be able to do the human to human negotiating in the same way. But bargaining for sure. And if we're dealing with commodities, it's happening now, but we shall see. The interesting thing is that the work that I did, which is negotiation preparation, is to prepare the human, not to prepare for bargaining.
Fascinating. This has been such a great conversation, Jonathan. I can't thank you enough for being here. It's always an honor seeing you. And for all of our viewers and listeners, please make sure to follow Jonathan. What are your pages?
So my email, my website, Stay Curious JBS. Stay Curious JBS, and all my handles are Stay Curious JBS. So we're trying to get the personal brand all aligned.
So we're going to make sure we stay very curious. And for all of our listeners, there's the Fight Less, Win More book as well, which is available on all major publishing platforms, including Amazon. So make sure that you check it out. And Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for the support. We appreciate it.
Thank you. This was our episode of the Money Signal podcast, From Main Street to Wall Street. Stay tuned for our next episode and make sure you follow us on all of our official social media pages and check out our website, moneysignalpodcast.com.